Hello, and a very warm welcome to this webinar from Management Today, brought to you in partnership with BSI. I'm Ailish Cronin from Management Today, and today we'll be talking about environmental management and why it's crucial for businesses to understand the importance of sustainability. We have a couple of polls running just below the video screen, so do take part in those, and I will announce some of the key findings later. I have 4 expert speakers with me who will be sharing some of their insights on this subject. First off, we have Chris Dufresne from Smith and Nephew. Chris, would you like to briefly introduce yourself and what you do? We seem to have lost Chris. So next we have Simon Randall, who's joining us from Aston Martin F1 team. Simon, do you want to say a few words about yourself and your role?
Yeah, sure. I'm Simon Randall. I work for the Aston Martin F1 team. I'm their head of EHS, facilities and sustainability. I've only joined the F1 team in March this year. Previously, I was with the Magna International organisation. Primarily, my role at Aston Martin is to strategise their sustainability journey. I've implemented lots of ISO 14001, 45001 and 50001 programs over many years. I've got a bit of a tickly throat today, so I apologise if I'm a bit growly, but I've got some water, so hopefully you'll be able to hear me okay. Thanks, Eilish.
Wonderful. We also have Joe Appleby from Impact with us today. Joe, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Eilish, and hello, everyone. My name's Joe Appleby, and I work with an organisation called Impact. We are a people development organisation headquartered in the beautiful Lake District with offices in 17 locations around the world. My role is Head of Sustainable Innovation. As an SME, I hold a couple of different roles. Internally, I look at our sustainability strategy, what we're doing here in the UK and across our other regions across the world. And looking at things like EcoVadis and also UN Global Compact, where I am a part of the advisory group for the UN Global Compact. My other role is a lot more external facing. I work with clients and co-create solutions that help to embed sustainability across their organizations. So that's looking at the intersection of leadership, change, and sustainable innovation. Thanks, Eilish.
Fantastic. And we're also joined by Murray Sace from BSI. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself and your role?
Great, thank you, Eilish. Good morning, afternoon to everybody. So I'm with BSI. I'm the global head for our sustainability solutions for the assurance business. And I've been there for just under 1 year, actually, but I spent a career in sustainability and ESG in the certification, the assurance and the consulting space, actually. I also sit on the board of accountability and the A1000 standards, which produce very relevant standards to organizations becoming accountable. And of course, BSI is a national standards body in itself and is producing very, very relevant standards these days against the ESG and sustainability agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, the need for businesses of all sizes to understand the importance of sustainability in their operating model has never been more crucial. In times of economic downturns, proactively looking at sustainability systems can help your business adapt rapidly to uncertainties, save you money, increase efficiencies, and improve brand reputation and staff engagement. However, recent YouGov research shows that only 18% of UK SMEs and 46% of UK large businesses are aware of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So how can organisations of all sizes meet their sustainability targets and be a force for good while also still being profitable? We'll be hearing from our panellists about this in a moment, and we'll also be taking audience questions at the end. So please post your questions for our panel at any point during this webinar in the comment box, which you'll find in the video player, and I'll get to as many as I can. So I'd like to start by asking you all, how can organisations ensure that sustainable initiatives are built into their operating models, and why this is so important? Simon, shall I start with you?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of Aston Martin F1, you know, we're not just about sort of winning races and delivering the numbers, not just about the customer experience. It's also about building an ethical enterprise. So our kind of stakeholders, and specifically our employees, can be proud of what we do. And our view is if we do that, that will release so much more productivity and discretionary effort from the workforce, which will help our business thrive a lot more and include morale. If a company is one-dimensional, it doesn't really deliver the bigger picture. And we think that, you know, if we don't do all those kind of really good things as well, we'll become static. And also, if you become static, you just can't continually improve your organization's performance. So as well as our business development strategy, which includes winning races and having a real good commercial offering, we've also got a We Care business development strategy, which includes diversity, equality, inclusion, environmental management, employee well-being, and positive brand image. And this encompasses our sustainable development goals and aligns us to our kind of ESG commitment. And then that also includes sort of, you know, the ethical supply chain that we have, making sure that we're legally compliant, making sure that our organisation behaves positively in the environment in terms of community spirit and philanthropy. And so really, we've just got to weave all those pieces in, as well as the goal of winning races. That's obviously what we want to do. That's what we are destined to do, and that's our objective. But we know we've got to do other stuff as well. We can't just say, yeah, we win loads of races. We've got to make sure we win races in the right way.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. Murray, how about you? What do you think?
Yeah, and it's a good leading question, actually, building in sustainability initiatives and objectives to an existing business model. Obviously, a number of companies feel such a need to do it. There is some are suffering from inertia and I think even a state of paralysis actually, where to start. I think for me, it's ensuring that you get an effective stakeholder model in place first, so you will listen to the people that matter and the people that have a stake in your organization, internal and external. That determines what's most important. So it brings up the big issues to enable a company to decide what is the right thing. Sorry, I got a tickly throat like you too, Simon. So and of course that leads to the setting of the right strategy. Enables you to set out the goals and objectives you need to achieve, knowing that you're on the right path and that you're taking people along with you in that trust building exercise. But the built-in part of it, baking that into an organization, is down to integration and implementation, obviously, and their awareness and communications are absolutely key. We came up with some statistics earlier on about awareness around the SDGs, actually, Eilish, and it's so true. The awareness is nowhere near where it needs to be. And without that, you will actually get this inertia through an organization. So I think, back to the subject matter, which is, I suppose, 14,001, so environmental management systems. That does give a strong basis to build in wider sustainability initiatives, most definitely. And it's environmental management first, but you can build so much more on top of that platform because it sets a structure out for the organization.
Okay, I think we might have lost Joe. Chris, are you back with us?
I'm back. So apologies, everyone. I missed the introductions. Literally, as we went live, my bandwidth just dropped out. So hi, everyone. I'm Christy Frayne. I'm Health, Safety, Environment Director for UK, Ireland, and Nordics for Smith & Nephew. My role, like many others, is all-encompassing, and I often feel like a salesman. And I think 14,001 often feels like a sales pitch. So today, hopefully, we can instill within everyone how it can be a real business benefit. I think around this particular question is something I'm very passionate about. And to Simon's point about winning races, that's what they do. That's their purpose. At Smith & Nephew, our purpose is medical devices and implants and wound technology to give better patient outcomes, so making people the best they can be. Ultimately, as businesses, we all share the same intent, and it's to be the best we can be as a business, dependent on whatever that outcome is. And I think to be the best we can be environmentally and from a sustainability point of view, we've got to keep it simple. We've got to make sure that these processes are embedded in the day-to-day, and that we're driving those continuously, and that everybody feels a level of accountability. So for me, to make sure that whether it's an ISO standard or targets and objectives around sustainability, or indeed just simply environmental impact, that those are embedded in the day-to-day, that it's within everything that we do, that it's not seen as a separate strategy almost, that we make sure that it's read across into all of our day-to-day tasks and objectives.
So thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to move on to the next question. So what are the associated cost risks, and how do you mitigate them? Murray, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I guess the obvious answer is it depends. I think we can look at it two ways, actually. I think that the links to materiality and doing the right thing are really important here, because it's a perceived cost to the organisation. But if you get it right, if you do the right thing and address the material issues within an organisation, and you've done that through effective stakeholder engagement, then those stakeholders are answered. The investors, the employees, the contractors, the consumers, the customers, and so on. So in that way, you're setting up a really good model for for making the right cost choices within an organisation, because you can begin to see longevity and resilience building in the organisation through that approach. But I think secondly, the costs, looking at it more directly, really, they're transformational costs. Obviously, if you're going to set goals or strategies that are going to push you against challenging goals, you will have to spend money on them, for sure. ISO 14001 is about environment. But it's also about discipline within the organisation and change in process, change in practice, and so on. And what it'll lead to for all organisations is a carbon piece, but certainly which takes us into energy and takes us into CapEx and so on. And there's waste and there's water and material use, etc. So all of those will have a cost implication to transform, but they'll have a return on investment. If you're going to enable that transformation, of course, you must do so. But by making those sorts of investments, you are introducing more continuity to the organisation. You're building that long-term resilience through adjusting your internal pricing and cost models. And you should be getting longer-term resilience. That should be the goal of a 14001 management system. So the costs, yes, you've got to take them on, but ensure you get it right. Do it around the right issues, the right goals, the right challenges, and it will pay you back over an acceptably short, shall we say, investment return period, I would say.
Fantastic. Thank you, Murray. Chris, what about you?
It's a great question, and one that I've considered many times. And throughout my career, I've worked in various different roles, different levels within the organisation and different organisations. And really dependent on the organisation, it's changed the perception of ISO 14001 and particularly the costs. And Murray just touched on the costs of implementation. And back to my previous point about simplicity and keeping it simple. The more you can do that, obviously, the lower the cost of implementation. As I've gone through my career, I think I've seen 14001 as less of a burden. And I think in my early career, having the audits, updating the documentation did feel like a burden. But in the role I'm in now, I see it as the cost implications of not doing it. So doing it is relatively cheap. And if you do it properly, it's relatively simple. And you can embed all of those processes in your day-to-day activities. But when you look at the cost of not doing it, I think that's far more significant. And it's back to the point of being a salesman, is minimal upfront investment can pay back dividends later down the line. So if you look at increased management control through those processes that ISO 14001 drives, you're less likely to have an environmental incident. The costs of environmental incidents are potentially catastrophic to a business. And that's the moral side of it apart. So as we develop our processes, it makes us a better business, it makes us better morally, and it protects our business from those kind of emergency type scenarios where there's something that's unexpected that could result in fines, etc., and reputational impact. But also as the sustainability and grows and the image of sustainability grows, there's even more emphasis on businesses to have much better control and not just the minimum requirements, but to actually be striving for that improvement. And again, 14,001 drives you towards that. And we now see tenders coming out of the Nordics that expect us to operate at a very high standard around sustainability and the whole corporate social responsibility element. But there's far more loading now on those tenders. So in years gone by, we would see perhaps 5% of those tender loading points be attributed to environmental sustainability. We're now seeing upwards of 20%. So if a company is deficient in one of those areas, they need to almost make those points back. And where can they do that? And it's being more competitive on their pricing. So actually, by working at that higher standard, you can be less competitive on your pricing, make more profit, and still be as competitive within that tendering process as any other business that perhaps isn't working to the same standard that you are environmentally. And again, linked back to all the other processes, if you're managing your environmental status well, then generally companies manage their quality well, they manage their production processes well. So it can often be a really good indicator as to how a business operates outside of just health, safety, or the environment.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. Jo, are you back with us?
I am back with you. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened to Zoom, but it just stopped operating, but I'm back again. Sorry.
Brilliant. I'll go to you for this one. So what are the associated cost risks and how do you mitigate them?
In terms of we as an SME, we don't do the ISO standards, but we are accredited by EcoVadis. So that is, and actually to Chris's point, a lot of the tenders that we get, a lot of the requests that we get for business from our clients, they are always asking us about what sustainability audits we have in place. And they are becoming more and more important for us as we are winning business with clients. There is an expectation that we have credentials in place in respect to our sustainability. And one thing that we do use is EcoVadis as a way to audit what we do. Because we're an SME, and I'm sure if there are other SMEs in this call, we don't have a huge number of people looking at our sustainability or environmental management. So we have to be realistic for what we can do. And how we measure our impacts. We're also a service organisation. We provide learning. We don't have an enormous environmental impact. Of course, we do have one, but it's not perhaps as large as others in manufacturing or other organisations. So in terms of, and a point also to Murray about measuring what matters to you as an organisation. So if you look at it from an ESG point of view, we do a lot in S. We don't have a big environmental impact. So we focus a lot of our energy around the S of ESG, so around people. So in terms of cost, we need to look at how we are operating, where we can make those differences in terms of our environmental impact, and also how are we measuring that and how are we demonstrating that in not only internally but externally.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jo. And Simon, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so when you implement an EMS and ISO 14001 program, there are some hardware costs. So, for example, recycling containers, material storage, bunding, that kind of stuff. There are some physical things that you have to put in place. And there are some other soft things as well, like documentation, processes, training. So, we have had to put in some clear investment in terms of making this kind of change into an ISO 14001 organisation. And as Chris said as well about the risks of non-compliance, ISO 14001 gives you that compliance platform and allows you to evaluate where you are compliant and not compliant. So you can avoid sort of environmental agency regulator prosecution risks as well. But by doing all that, you're kind of making the right arrangements for your people so they can work more productively, they can work more efficiently, they are much more happier. A lot of people have got an emotional connection to the environment. So it's really important that we sort of tick all those boxes by doing the right things and having the right arrangements. And also a lot of companies now and a lot of governing bodies are asking organisations to have ISO 14001. And if you don't have that, then they won't do business with you. And that's certainly clear in the automotive industry, places like Jaguar Land Rover and Toyota, that kind of stuff. But also the FIA, that is the governing body that runs Formula One, also asks that every team by the end of sort of next summer has got ISO 14001 or similar certification. So it is a kind of a business thing, really. You know, without it, you know, some companies can't make money. But the other thing to add is that what we found is that by making all the new arrangements, especially on things like recycling, is that we've been able to reduce our cost of recycling processes by getting rebates on separating metals, baling cardboard, and having sort of cheaper logistics costs in terms of reducing the number of runs to and from kind of recycling centres. So as you sort of have a more organised business, you can then be more efficient, and then the costs just naturally sort of come down as it becomes the normal way of life.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to now take a look at our poll results. And I just want to go through them and ask, is there anything that surprises you or particularly stands out for you with these poll results? Jo, is there anything that you find surprising about them?
I can't see the poll results.
I've sent everybody a link to them.
Brilliant, thank you. I didn't see that. You might want to go to somebody else while I have a quick look, and then I will tell you.
Has anybody else seen the poll results, and is there anything that stands out in particular, or anything that's sort of surprising about them?
I can certainly comment on the first one I've just opened up, actually. So do you think your company's currently doing enough to reach sustainability net zero targets? 40% say yes, 40% say no, 20% don't know. I'm quite surprised in the figures, actually. I'd have thought the don't knows were higher than that, because there's a lot of confusion around net zero, and then introducing other terminology like carbon neutrality and setting pathways between now and 2050, 2040, and so on. A lot of those pathways are fairly vague, in fact, even if it is a science-based target. 40% say yes, they're currently doing enough. Everything would suggest that we are not doing enough. And I'd like to know what sectors that 40% came from. I don't suppose you have that sort of granularity. I'd be really interested to know. I mean, that's great. It's an encouraging figure. I would need, it's probably the nature of my job, actually. I'd need to see the evidence to know that that is the case, and have the reassurance that we are doing enough, because I think we all, even if we're doing enough, I think we still actually got to do more, if that makes sense. I'll let somebody else comment on the EMS.
Yeah. What about the second one? Do you have an environmental management system that meets the ISO 14001 standard? Is there anything about that poll that surprises anyone?
I think that's fairly black and white, isn't it? They either do or they don't. But it throws up an additional question, actually. How do you know it meets the standard? Is it through certification? Or is it through some sort of self-assessment and self-declaration that you do? The external certification, I'm sure that'll come up in later conversation, obviously brings that independence to the process, challenges the system, its implementation, its effectiveness, and importantly, the continuous improvement that you get out of the management system. So that, to me, is a system meeting the standard, not one that should we say, has been checked internally through an internal audit function. Not saying that's the wrong approach. It needs both approaches really to get the most out of that investment.
Brilliant, thank you. Simon, what do you think about the first question? Do you think your company is currently doing enough to reach sustainability and net zero targets? Is there anything about that poll that is noteworthy?
Yeah, I think for me, I thought it'd be higher. I thought there'd be much more companies engaging on it because it's such a kind of topical thing. And maybe because I've been working in organisations that have embraced it for so many years, you kind of think that everybody else is doing that as well. So I really thought that there'd be much more organisations out there that are doing stuff in order to sort of meet these requirements. And I guess the other bit about 14,001, I think companies do steer clear of doing that because they don't have to do it from their customers' point of view, and they are concerned about the costs of it, because even getting the certification from a certification body like BSI does cost a bit of money in the initial stages. So I think that worries people as well. But I think it's really about the CEOs and the leaders of these businesses that have got to kind of start giving their organisations permissions to get into this space. Without that, then sometimes people at our level, in terms of the change managers for the ESG and EHS agenda, maybe don't have the right kind of level of authority. So I think that we must do more really to influence the CEOs to get into their mindset that we do more work on ESG and EHS initiatives rather than just, for me, winning the race. It's all about doing the other things as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. Chris, what about you? Is there anything about these two poll results that surprise you?
I'm not particularly surprised. I think there's a lot of companies out there that don't have the same level of drive as many. Those that have got 14,001, and to Simon's point, it's not mandatory. So companies can opt in and opt out of this. It comes back to what we discussed around cost and what we'll go forwards and discuss shortly around the benefits as well. That until the business truly realises what the costs or implications of non-cost of doing this truly is and what the benefits are, I would hope that we then start to see more businesses adopting 14,001. Around, is there do they have a compliant management system? The management system can be very, very simple. It doesn't need to be overly complicated. It needs to be fitting for your business and the risks that your business has when it comes to the environment. But all elements of that 14,001 requirement provide a benefit to your business, whether it be a legal register so you understand what applies to your business and how you are compliant to it, can only be a benefit. Should it go wrong, then you have that system to fall back on, that you understand what applies and what you've done about it, what mitigation you've put in place. So again, it can only be a benefit. It doesn't have to be accredited to ISO 14001, but having it there, working out that standard, can only be a good thing anyway. But no, I think there's a lot of businesses that have systems that perhaps don't meet it because they don't necessarily need to. But as we go forward and more companies get on board with this, and there is that reputational element to this, then we will start to see the balance shift, is my belief.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. And Joe, is there anything about either the companies currently doing enough to reach sustainability and net zero targets, or the ISO 14001 standard? Is there anything in those polls that surprise you?
Well, I think, if we look at the fact we're trying to be net zero in 2050, here in Cumbria, we're trying to do that by 2036, I think. I'm surprised that there are businesses that are there thinking that we're currently doing enough. I suspect that we're all not doing as much as we should be doing if we really are serious about getting to this target. But Chris mentioned something that I think is really key to this, which is the cost of implementing some of these strategies, and that perhaps is what is preventing businesses from doing as much as they want to, because there is an investment that's required in order for us to get anywhere close to reaching the kind of net zero targets, and cost will hold lots of businesses back. At the same time, there are organizations out there who are not putting any systems in place. But perhaps they're waiting for legislation before they do that. So there are organisations that are doing a lot. There are lots of organisations that aren't doing nearly enough. And there's a cost implication that is making that really difficult for businesses, I think. But there needs to be a desire from the top of the organisation, and there needs to be support in the rest of the organisation in order to put some of these targets in place, and to be able to help people across the organisation embed different ways of working in order to achieve these sustainability targets. So I'm not surprised by it, but I think really if we're really honest, I'm not sure any of us in any organisation is doing as much as we need to. But I do think that the cost of implementing some of these is very difficult to do.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone, for discussing the poll. So I want to talk about the benefits of ISO 14001, which is an internationally agreed standard that sets out the requirements of environmental management systems. So how can this certification help organisations improve their environmental performance, and why does it make good business sense? Murray, should we kick off with you?
Yes, happy to lead in. I think perhaps some of the other speakers will probably bring some much more sort of practical experience to this. But for me, as for any management system, it does instill good practice within an organisation if it didn't previously exist. And with the right awareness raising communications, and it is a change. It is a change to discipline that's needed, and in this instance, to tackle environmental management, but also to tackle the bigger issues. If you adopt a management system mentality, you're not quite as put off about tackling some of these big issues. It's good, puts a structure in place to set the right goals and challenges for the organisation. So beyond environment, and within the environmental context itself, there's a lot obviously to address in terms of embarking on the carbon journey, setting those net zero goals that you'll need to at some point, making sure that they that pathway is marshalled along the way in the right way by the right resources with the right competence. The management system should put all of that in place and keep it in check. So it's a basis to move that along. It's a basis to move circular economy along. So you stop talking about waste and material savings. You start getting into this closed loop mentality and adopting circular economy principles. Exactly the way to do that can be a management system rather than a standalone initiative within an organisation. Even how you engage with stakeholders, I know that's perhaps off on more of a tangent actually, but the communications piece is important internally, definitely, but externally, it certainly is as well actually, can lead to wider stakeholder engagement. You'd need to go beyond 14001 to address some of those social elements that Joe mentioned back there. And I think leadership is the other one for me as well. It gets leadership on board, and that's tested in practice to align with the standard. And if you've got the leadership on board, anything becomes possible in principle, certainly. I think the benefits of 14001 are fairly well reflected because it's been around for a long time. It was a British standard, and originally BS 7750 was 20 years old actually this year, and we're still seeing growth in its uptake, and in some places we're seeing real resurgence in the standard. So it does work in practice. It does deliver those benefits that all the speakers have talked about. The only last thing I'd mention is around the certification itself. And if that certification is done properly, the external certification piece, obviously that then helps to build the credibility and build the trust with the stakeholders. Brilliant.
Thank you so much, Murray. Simon, what about you?
Yeah, so I think for me, I don't like working in a chaotic business. It kind of gives me anxiety. So I think in terms of ISO 14001, it enables the organisation to become organised, be led by processes, and be led by people who know what they're doing based on a set of policies and procedures. So when I joined Aston Martin, it was not like that, and it was very much reliant on Fred that looks after the waste management stuff, and he had no training. There wasn't any procedures or anything in place. So for me, the benefits are kind of improving the organisation and reducing the chaos so that the kind of stress levels for the business can go down and then flow. And then there's some other things that come across that as well in terms of legal compliance. I think we've already talked about that in terms of avoiding regulatory noise from any regulators with regard to legal compliance issues. But what it also does is that enables you to risk assess your environmental impacts, but more importantly, look at what opportunities you might need to do to continuously improve. So there is a PDCA embedded cycle in the ISO 14001 structure, which means that you are continually reviewing, checking the results and putting improvement opportunities in place. And then there's things like employee competency. It's essentially making sure that those people are trained and they're aware. And then when it comes to the actual audit itself, you've then got to put your business on a plate for the auditor, and the auditor will kind of have a look and see what's really happening. And so you really have to bear your business soul to those auditors. And that kind of has a massive kind of motivation for you to make it look good. So it will also improve things like maintenance systems and health and safety systems and corrective action management systems as well. So those are certainly the benefits for us. It's really about having a framework and being organised rather than it being reliant on a number of people.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Simon. And Chris, we move on to you.
I'm not sure there's a huge amount I can add, to be honest. I think Simon summed it up really well. For me, it frames the organisation's context very clearly. It defines the scope of the organisation, and to Simon's point, identifies ultimately what those risks are and the controls required for the business to manage those risks effectively. The next step, and again, it's looking at those opportunities and how does a business continually improve and strive to be better than where it is today. So looking forward to tomorrow, what are those opportunities? How do we meet our net zero goals? How do we meet our commitments to zero waste to landfill, etc.? And it drives you through those processes to be a better company tomorrow. It gives you the understanding of where you're at today. And through those audit processes, it does challenge you, and it challenges you again to improve and to be better, but to achieve that minimum level of expectation of compliance. And again, companies will have very different policies and standards, but the purpose of the audit is to ensure that you are meeting your own expectations, not necessarily the expectations of the company down the road, but your expectations against your processes and your policies. So again, it's driving you continually for improvement. The benefits come back to the reputation for the business. So it does become a very useful tool. It shouldn't be something that sits on a shelf and it's only dusted off for audits. It should be embedded. And the best example I can give is when we look at waste reduction. We look at how we can better segregate it, how we can find a better end use for that waste. What our management system does is drive us to look at the raw materials we put into the process. How do we put less raw material in? How do we reduce our scrap? How do we get it right first time so we're not making it twice? We're not doubling our waste at the end. We're not putting twice the amount of raw material in. So actually, when we focus down, one of the key benefits is improved production processes, because we've got it embedded right at the start within engineering, within our design phase for our product. It drives us to be a better business that's more profitable throughout our production processes, and that flow improves, our waste reduces, we get a better designed end product.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. And Joe, is there anything you'd like to add?
There's an enormous amount covered there. There's just a couple of things I'm going to pick up on. I think in terms of having the policy and the procedures in place and making sure you're sharing that with people is really important to drive change. And of course, I'm going to come at it always at people side of it, because within our organizations are people, and we're often asking them to do something different. Looking at things in a slightly different way, perhaps looking at waste in a different way, and trying to engage them in the process of improving environmental targets. there's some work that I did with UN Global Compact. We went across the UK and spoke with around 600 different people in different parts of the UK. And the biggest challenge that people had within sustainability was, we've got this great management system in place, we've got policy, we've got procedures. How do I help engage other people across the organisation to do things differently and have a different mindset around, for example, waste management? What's the difference? What are the changes that people can make within their respective parts of the business to support that really great policy and procedures around your kind of environmental sustainability? And there's one example I get. There was a guy, we were working with an organisation, Lend-Lease. He worked on within the building site. Every day he would get new materials coming into onto the site that were wrapped up in huge amounts of plastic. It was about empowering people like him to notice the amount of waste from plastic coming in, for him to then kind of notice that there was way too much plastic that wasn't required on this building materials. So he challenged the business that was providing the materials and said, look, we don't need to have it wrapped up in so much plastic. And so he managed at his level to make change happen. So how can we engage people across the organisation in the policy and the procedures around environmental strategy? How can we empower them wherever they sit within their organisations to be able to make decisions, simple decisions that will impact the overall environmental impact of the organisation? So great to have those things in place. How can we ensure that everyone can make those changes happen? They're empowered to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody. And of course, if there's anyone in the audience that has any questions, please do keep sending them in and I will get to those very shortly. So moving on, if your organisation is already on board with environmental management, how do you then take sustainability targets to the next level to benefit your business? Simon, do you briefly just want to explain?
Yeah, sure. So our environmental management system is fairly embryonic, so we are developing that, but we do know that we've got to go further. Part of our environmental management system is around our supply chain carbon footprinting calculations. So we want to know our global outreach in terms of how we travel around the world doing all of our events, and also what it takes to build the car and to build the brand. So we're currently developing a process where we are reaching out to all our main suppliers to get their carbon footprint as well. So it's not just about our carbon footprint, it's about theirs as well. And we think that's really important from the sort of, whole F1 piece, rather than just focus on what we do in our factory. But then what we're also doing as well is make sure that we have processes where we can be philanthropic and where we give benevolence to the organisations and the communities in the world that may not have the benefit of working in a big organisation like ours. So we make sure that we do have tactics to kind of reach out and promote some of the work that we're doing and do a give back into the communities that we work into as well. As well as the usual renewables. We've got a new building being constructed at the moment, and that's going to have kind of state-of-the-art PV solar panels, heat pumps, lots of high-efficiency equipment, lots of high-efficiency building. And when we move there, we want people to behave in a conservation mindset. We want those behaviours to be thinking about how we reduce waste and how we don't leave lights on and we don't leave equipment running when we don't need to. And then overall as well, we're looking at synthetic fuels and electrification, not just of cars, but of other sort of vehicles that we use internally in the business.
Thank you so much, Simon. Chris, what about you? Do you want to very briefly go through how sustainability targets can take businesses to the next level?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely key to remain dynamic. Once you've achieved a goal, what's next? How do you improve that? How do you continually strive for the next step? And I think where many businesses fail, and Joe touched on it a little bit, is set a very high level objective, but don't communicate down through the entire organization how people can influence that. So as a business, we're going to do X. Well, what's every employee going to do differently every day to help achieve and support that goal? And to Simon's point, through whether it be acquisitions or new facilities, making sure that we set our high level of expectations throughout that process becomes absolutely key. And I think it does come back to mindsets and culture and how we do things naturally every day without being prompted. And having a new facility, and Smith and Nephew is doing very similar at the moment through a design phase of a new R&D facility, is really instilling that ethos. Our 2050 obligations and needs, we're instilling those now to create that mindset, to create that culture, so we can be ahead of the game, so we can remain dynamic. But even looking at packaging at the most simplistic level, how do we get our products around the world? So how do we reduce the amount of packaging? How do we make the boxes smaller? So every time we send a pallet, instead of having 10 boxes on a pallet, how do we get 12 boxes or 15 boxes? Because that then reduces the air travel, it reduces the travel by road, by sea, by air, and it's reducing our emissions. And pushing that ethos and methodology all the way through our supply chain, that's when we can really make a difference. When everybody from CEO down to employees, down to our suppliers and all of their employees, they understand what their responsibilities are and they understand how they can influence our corporate level goals and targets.
Thank you so much, Chris. And Joe, do you want to take this one briefly?
Yeah, briefly, I'll take this. Quite a lot of things have been covered. Within our organisation, we are small. We're an SME. So in the UK, we have less than 100 employees. And of the way that our organisation is structured is that we get challenged by people that work for us all the time around what we should be doing more or less of. So I think we have a type of organisation where people will be challenging us to say we're not doing enough around carbon. We're not doing enough around supporting our communities, although we do have and have had something called Learning in the Community running within the organisation for more than 10 years, which encourages people to go out and do something of their choice, supporting their community. And more than 80% of the people in the business take 3 paid days a year to go and do an activity of their choice around environmental or social sustainability. It has to be something that benefits the business, it has to be something that benefits the community organisation, and something that benefits their own learning. So that is tied into our organisation, and people are expected to take that time. What that does is enable people, whatever they're passionate about, because we know that lots of people really care about the environment and lots of people really care about kind of other social sustainability issues. It enables them to go and do something that matters for them, that they can do in the company's time. So outside of just environmental sustainability, look for the ways in which people can go and do stuff that they care about, because that really helps to drive sustainability overall within the organisation.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joe. And Murray, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. I think most things have been said really about breaking through into wider sustainability, and EMS is going to do that. I think the nature of the current sustainability agenda is going to do that for you as we're driven down the carbon path, actually. And if we, let's stick with carbon as the obvious example there, actually, because companies are being driven one way onto a low carbon pathway, and that leads to those wider sustainability issues. So you're going to address through that, obviously, energy use, but wider resource use, water, wastewater, because they will all have a CO2 emissions implication. Even as Chris said, the packaging, that isn't just doing saving on resources, it's saving on carbon, transportation, and overall behaviour of businesses. So it's going to take you there anyway, with today's agenda in mind. What's important is measuring the impact. I think finding the right ways to measure the impact beyond the boundaries of a conventional EMS becomes more important. And companies need to build their story. They need to build a sustainability story, and it's a good place to start.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody. I'd like to tackle some of our audience questions now. So let me just find. So one of the questions was, what are the appropriate KPIs to judge success in this area? Is there anyone that would like to take on that question?
I'll just kick it off quickly because I think I just mentioned something about exactly that, Eilish, and that was impact. That was for companies having to really shift the dial a bit and think about how they're going to measure their impact on society. And Joe alluded to it most definitely too. And there's not an off-the-shelf set of KPIs to do that. Every company is going to have to do that differently. So that's one to work on. That becomes an initiative in itself. But again, I think a change management initiative within an organisation. We'll see more of that.
Thank you. Simon, is there anything you'd like to add to that question?
Yeah, sure. In terms of KPIs, they are kind of bespoke to what your organisation is doing. So we spend a lot of time analysing our consumption of gas, water, electricity, waste management, the waste hierarchy. What do we recycle? What don't we recycle? What do we burn? What do we give away? What do we reuse? But then we also manage things like number of incidents occurring. How many complaints have we got? Incidents are waste. They are interruptions that your business doesn't need and doesn't want. It ties up people in lots of kind of ways, investigations or corrective actions. So the image really there is around, are you reducing the number of incidents and noise that you're getting as part of your business? So that's a real key one for us that we manage on a daily basis. But then we kind of list how many ideas have been generated. We find out how many people have been trained, and we're looking to that to improve each time. And then on our sort of chemical management, we sort of measure how many chemicals that we use actually affect the environment. And then we look to substitute those as well on an ongoing improvement sort of substance process. We also sort of have done surveys on commuting mileage and supply chain mileage as well. So we can apply a reduction on that and get a KPI of how that is tracked. And then there's things like some of the softer stuff, the impact of absence in the business, because sustainability is also about human capability and human availability. So we see that as a sort of key KPI in terms of how we make sure that we've got people in the business running the business for us. So they're a bit of a flavour for the ones that we use.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Simon. Another question we have is, in managing a supply chain network with large numbers of participants, many of which are small, unsophisticated entities, what would the panel recommend as a starting point to drive the topic of sustainability throughout? Joe, should we start with you? Do you have anything to add to that?
First things first, you need to reach out to them to say, and perhaps say, this is something that matters to us as an organisation. We'd really like to support you on your journey, but we don't know where you are, because as in, we don't know where you are on that journey and what level of support we might be able to give you. So I think this is a great opportunity to bring voices in, to create a little bit perhaps of a network, to say, what are some of the issues for you as a smaller organisation, or perhaps where are you on your journey and what can we do to support you? We want to work with you. We're really clear about what we want to do as an organisation, and we want to support our supply chain. First things first, find out where they are, have a conversation, listen to what they are, what some of the challenges are for them, and then think about how you might be able to support them. But first things first, you won't know where they are on that journey. So try and set up some sort of a webinar or some sort of session where you can gather some more information to help you think about what you'll be able to, or how you'll be able to support different organisations of different sizes. But you won't know that until you go out and ask. So I would suggest that would be a great starting point and a really good way to build relationships with your supply chain.
Thank you so much, Joe. Chris, do you have anything to add for that one?
I think working with them is absolutely key, to Joe's point. Understanding where you've got shared interest and potentially shared processes that can influence and achieve those shared interests Just as an example, I many years ago worked for a company that used a subcontractor that was about 40 miles away, and we did daily deliveries morning and afternoon to that subcontractor. Half the time the van was empty. So why didn't we just do it every other day? Okay, so even at the most simplistic level, there was opportunities that we could have halved the environmental impacts by that transport run. And that's what we look to do. It benefited us, it benefited them. Okay, so it's around that shared goal. Set out what your expectations are, understand where they currently are, and how can you as a business support them in achieving your expectations.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. I think there's time for just one last question. I'd like to ask the panel, if businesses haven't already embraced environmental management, why should they start now? Murray, do you want to take us off with this one?
Yeah, oh, that's really simple for me, actually. I think in one of these self-help books, not that I use them that much, but there's an expression I came across that is day one, not one day. And you know, that just says it all, really. If not now, then when?
Brilliant. Thank you, Murray. And Jo, do you have anything to add?
It kind of disheartens me to think people aren't thinking about it. We all have a responsibility, and your customers and your clients and your employees will want to see some difference being made. So, you know, there isn't any hiding place anymore. We all need to take responsibility, whatever organisation we're in there. We all need to start somewhere, and that might actually be ourselves. But yeah, we all have a part to play in this.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jo. And Simon, if businesses haven't already embraced environmental management, why should they start now?
Yeah, I think it's really about thriving, not just surviving. So organisations, if they want to go the distance, have got to think about that mentality. What are they doing for tomorrow? You know, and as I said earlier on, it's not just about winning the races. It's about what you do for the bigger picture, really. So it's really about, you know, planning for future risks. Do you want to be here in 10 years' time doing a great job, or do you just want to be in the chaos? I guess is my kind of final point.
Thank you so much, Simon. And Chris, what about you? If businesses haven't already embraced this, why should they start now?
I think we've seen in the last 2.5 years with the COVID pandemic, I'm surprised we've made it this far, to be honest, and COVID's not been mentioned. But with the COVID pandemic, businesses have had to change dramatically. Environmental requirements are changing, perhaps not triggering the change within businesses at the pace that COVID did. But we've seen what's happened on the high street. The businesses that didn't change their business models, that didn't adjust to the impacts of COVID, aren't here anymore. As we go forward, we're going to see that revolution. There's going to become that what's socially acceptable and what's socially not acceptable. And those businesses that don't move with the times, that don't change, that don't become the expectation of socially acceptable, won't be those businesses of the future.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today, but I hope you found the discussion useful, and it will also be available on demand once we finished the session. Many thanks to our speakers, Chris, Simon, Jo and Murray, for taking part, and to everyone else who's joined us today. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, BSI, for partnering with us on this. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Great, thank you.